action points identified in the previous section, we will now identify what is bound to be the most powerful word to make better decisions, drastically reduce bureaucracy, and restore lost trust. This starts at the root cause causing the highest damage, missing the tipping point law of nature at the first level. We have already identified that a switch from exact to open practices needs to take place when this tipping point is crossed. And yes, at the other side, many organizations have implemented open practices via agile philosophy and self-organization, and they deliver better results. That is practices like giving multidisciplinary teams the freedom to make decisions. But nowadays, when these new frameworks are scaled up beyond the boxes they were developed for, they are criticized just like the traditional best practices. To get to the bottom of this, we developed an exercise. The record time for the needed learning impact was 2 minutes. At this point, I could just tell you the outcome, but then there's a pretty good chance the learning impact will be insufficient. To prevent this, I invite you to do the exercise and not tell the outcome to others until they've done the exercise and the discussion, like the one we are doing now, has been done. Here we go. The question to answer is this: which working practices have become the preferred practices during the previous 2 decades? In each row, you can choose a practice from the left or the right, but not both. There are 2 rounds. During the first round, please answer the question by looking at the practices applied throughout the whole of a large company, institution, or system like health services. In the second round, the same question is answered against a team you work with or your personal practices. Please do it quickly, without thinking about it. Please hit pause now and go to this link. Let's add one more step to this. Please try to answer this question. What could be the one word that tells experts and decision makers at all levels when the practices from the left or right column provide the better results? The word needs to be universally applicable across disciplines, industries, best practices, subjects, and cultures. Please hit pause now and write down the words that pop up in your mind. The typical outcomes of the exercise were: at the large organizational and system levels, the practices of the left column dominated. At the team and personal levels, and with agile practices, it was the right column. Breaking things down into parts was rather often selected with agile backgrounds as well. Small part of the participants said, it depends. Anyhow, here we have another root cause of the highest damage. How can any organization function properly when there is a structural conflict between the practices applied at the organization and system levels and those applied or needed at the team or individual level? A further pattern emerged. The traditional best practices have been dominantly developed with the practices of the left column. Agile practices and those of self-organizations have been developed with those of the right column. With the dominance of traditional best practices, practices of the left column were applied to situations where the practices of the right column should have been selected. In other words, we have gone through 2 decades of adding ever more unnecessary bits and pieces, dependencies, and associated change needs into companies, institutions, and systems. The good news is that this situation is solvable via one word. Here it is. It's all about predictability. When things are predictable, the exact practices, like those of the left column, usually provide a better value. When things are difficult to predict, it's open practices, like those of the right column. There is an important add-on to this. That's area of high risk, like surgery, aircrafts, and nuclear power plants. In these situations, the combination of these practices from the left and the right, with practices such as extensive training, testing, and learning from mistakes, is required to operate them at relatively low risks. This means that the difference between problem solving and problem fueling decisions is made at the situation level, not the best practice, model, framework, strategy, or trend level. This is important, so let me repeat it. The difference between problem solving and problem fueling decisions is made at the situation level, not the best practice, model, framework, strategy, or trend level. There's more good news. The existing bureaucracy can now be used to integrate this into decision making. It's a matter of establishing this policy and making it overrule anything in conflict with relevant laws of nature. Use exact practices when situations are predictable. Use open practices when situations are difficult to predict. As this policy is in effect, something else will emerge. It will take ages to get the conflicting rules, processes, and so much more adjusted. Well, there's no need to wait for this to happen. It's a matter of an add-on policy like this one. When a conflict between this policy and existing rules, processes, strategies, and the like occurs, the deviation can be approved via a drastically simplified deviation approval procedure. To get an idea of how such a deviation could look like, just go to page 10 of this white paper. With the most powerful practice identified, let's list out further practices of these laws of nature. Like bridges are built on the road, virtual bridges can be built within and between organizations. Like roundabouts have replaced rigid traffic lights, many rigid linear processes can be made obsolete by creating natural process flows. And of course, there is the possibility of creating flight paths. There's still a complication. This illustration could suggest that the switch to open practices needs to be done for everything. That is not the case. The overall situation is like water. Water can be frozen, fluid, or gas at the same time. In complex environments, exact and open practices can and do exist next to each other. In fact, in the old days of my work environment, we experienced the complementary use of exact and open practices being far more effective than using them separately. The further thing is that there is plenty of room to get us back to situations prior to the level 1 tipping point and the unnecessary growth of effort and cost brought to healthy levels. Here is the corresponding flatten the curve illustration. Let's now establish how this relates to popular models and science. Here are the Cynefin framework by Dave Snowden, the agreement and certainty model by Ralph Stacey, and the structure behavior model by Jürgen Appelo. A question to answer is this: why have these models not delivered at the levels expected or required? Well, instead of me answering this question here, I would like to invite you to do a health check of these models against the guiding questions we have provided throughout the manifesto. Predictability came with the structure behavior model. With that, here's how the manifesto aligns with these models. Simple and complicated are about predictable situations. Complex and chaotic are about difficult or impossible to predict situations. The intervention is done where the highest impact can be made at the lowest cost and risk. That's where the unnecessary exponential growth is created. In these models, the exponential growth is created when the exact practices, which work well for simple and complicated situations, continue to be applied for complex and chaotic situations. In other words, this is where the 90 billion cost savings opportunity we have identified in the previous manifesto tutorial is waiting to be unlocked. Here is a fresh piece of information. In Germany, from physics and through one of his TV broadcasts, Professor Harald Lesch has identified the level 1 tipping point as well and predictability to go about it. Let's finish this section with more guiding questions, or better, hard to ignore questions. When decisions in or for complex situations are made and the one-word policy is missing. Where's the one-word policy that tells when the exact practices should be applied and when the open practices should be applied? But attempts are made to recreate trust. How can our leaders and experts be trusted when relevant laws of nature are missing during decision-making, or worse, are overruled? When laws of nature are missing in our constitutions and they are of no relevance in our legal systems. When something that worked earlier or is proven within a box shall be scaled up beyond the box. What gaps, conflicts and problems may need to be resolved at the scale-up level? Has a health check workshop with representatives of all groups involved and impacted been done? Have the workshop participants concluded together that the scale-up is practical, executable, scalable and sustainable? Let's now move on to a more personal question. If you are a decision maker, scientist, project manager or initiative owner, how do you want to be seen by others and by your children in 5 or 10 years? As someone who continued to fuel today's problems with the same thinking that created them? Or you became aware, educated yourself right away, started corrective activities and guided others to find and apply the problem-solving thinking? That's it for now. In the following tutorials, we will identify how simple solutions to complex problems can be found. Thank you.